Hello, Jillian. Thank you for being here with us. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Thank you for being here with us and for sharing your experience with us. So we are really excited to learn more about how to negotiate better. And we are going to start our questions in the pre-negotiation phase. So how should someone prepare for a negotiation?
Yeah, I think that's a great first question. And I think, under preparing or not feeling really confident going into a negotiation is one of the main reasons I see why negotiations sometimes don't go well. I think we work so hard for our employers and add so much value, but we don't spend a lot of time and work really hard to make sure we're getting the best compensation package that we can. So one of the main things I say is just really allocate the time to preparing and feeling confident. So I tell a lot of my clients to actually take the day off before a negotiation, which sounds crazy, but then work out, prep, prepare, feel really good, and then go into it in a really good mind space. And I think, when else do you have a situation where you can so directly impact your wealth and your future wealth over many years than a negotiation? So treat it as important. And then within the actual preparation, I'm definitely an advocate for, doing your research, market research if you can. So Glassdoor, Fishbowl, Alpha, there's a bunch of news sources. But I think also realizing there are limitations to that research. It's good to have an idea of what the market is paying, but every company pays people a little bit differently. So I would say research, but don't, solely rely just on market data. Also spend the time to really kind of identify your strengths and what makes you unique and be able to confidently and concisely articulate that. And when you can do that and you really feel confident about those things, that is so persuasive in a negotiation. And then the third piece I would say is really just practice and prep exactly what you're going to say. Have a little speech or a little script. And kind of practice your piece and then also practice when to stop talking. I see a lot of people go into negotiations and kind of just word vomit a bunch of stuff. And then don't always, they kind of almost talk themselves out of the negotiation. So practice what you're going to say, but also practice using kind of silence as a powerful tool within the negotiation.
Well, that's great because sometimes the hardest part is to know what to say and when to stop talking for your message to be clear. Mm-hmm. So next question. What are the key biases women face in negotiations?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think, one that I didn't really realize was a bias or stat before going into this in the past year. After spending my career in compensation, I had no idea, was women expect and ask for lower compensation. So I think that's a good tool to just kind of know when you're maybe really worrying about a certain amount of money that you're going to ask for, know that you may be asking for quite a bit lower than your male counterpart. So I think that's just one that's good to remember. And then in practice, I also really see the likability bias impacting how women negotiate. And the likability bias is, on one hand, women are supposed to be nice and agreeable in the workplace to be liked, and that impacts how our performance is assessed. But then we're also supposed to be assertive to be seen as a leader, and that impacts how we move up in an organization. So we're already trying to manage these conflicting demands. Which are pretty hard to balance. And then when you throw negotiating into the mix, a lot of women just choose not to negotiate because they don't want to tip that balance to too assertive or too aggressive. So I think that is one that I see impact most women day to day. And I think it can be subconscious. But a lot of women choose not to negotiate because they don't want to be seen as aggressive. And what I love to support clients with is knowing that negotiating can actually be positive. It doesn't need to be a big negative aggressive thing. You can be really clear and confident in your ask and still frame it in a positive way. But yeah, that's probably the biggest one that I see kind of on a day-to-day. And it's fair. It is really hard to balance the two conflicting demands.
Yeah, at this point, I find really important what you said about practicing your speech the day before, so you can get to negotiate without being aggressive, but being assertive. So yeah, I think that's something that might help. So our next question is, how do you know what elements of compensation to negotiate for?
Yeah, so I would say probably like 85% of the women I work with really focus just on base salary when they come to me, which is definitely important. Base salary significantly impacts your life and your expenses and all those things. But I would say also make sure you're thinking about bonus compensation and equity compensation. So stock options, RSUs, whatever it might be, if they're a part of your offer. Those are more often flexible and more negotiable than base salary. So often base salary is kind of constrained by a pay range, whereas a bonus or equity, especially sign-on awards, can be a lot more flexible. So I would say don't discount those. Do your due diligence on them, ask questions, make sure you understand them well. And that's where I actually see a lot of the material wealth being made, especially once you get to more senior levels in a company, is through equity and bonus. So definitely know that they can be negotiated and sometimes easier negotiated than base salary. And then also within that, there's so many other pieces to an offer. So long-term savings programs, professional development allowances, ESPPs, severance, non-compete, role scope, title, like there's so many other pieces that really come into play. And they all are up for negotiation. So I think we sometimes just focus on base salary, but really, if you getting an extra week of vacation or being able to work from home every Friday, these things can really positively impact our work experience. So know that you don't need to just focus kind of on the traditional monetary components, but there's also a lot of room in these other pieces. And we've really been seeing that in the past couple of years, especially during the pandemic. Employers are getting more creative with offering different perks and, like health and wellness allowances and stuff like
that. So we have a comment from the audience. Mary says that she's just learning that negotiation doesn't have to be so combative or angry or aggressive. And she really wants to learn more about this essential skill because she didn't even know anything about all this. So maybe if you could give some advice on this.
Yeah, definitely. So I saw from watching shows like
yes. Scandal Suits.
That's so interesting because I've spent my career in compensation. So I've been doing this for 8 years in-house at different companies. Most recently it was at Lululemon. And I think, negotiations are often positive experiences. Like usually you both want a mutual thing, whether that's being a new job offer and the employee wants to join the company and the employer wants you to, or if it's a promotion, usually there's a mutual goal, which is great. It's just figuring out the nuances. And I really think the first step for women is just asking for it. And you can frame it in a positive way. So if you're working within a company, you can say, I really love working here and I really see myself here long term. And because of that, I wanted to be open with you about where I'm at from a compensation perspective. And I'm really hoping for a $30,000 increase. And I'd love to chat through that with you. So it's kind of like you're almost framing it in a way that's beneficial for your employer. You're saying you love working at the company, you really want to stay here long term. And because of that, you just wanted to be open with them. And that is what you're saying ultimately. If you're asking for more money, it's likely because you want to stay. So kind of framing it in that way can be really impactful. But still really confidently and clearly asking for what you want. So focusing on that specific number or, vacation or whatever it might be. that kind of mix of being positive but super clear can be really powerful.
Great. Fortunately, we have many questions from the audience. Eleanor asks, how often is vacation flexible upon hire?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I've definitely seen over the past couple of years it become more flexible. I think a lot of employers are realizing that, how important taking time off is, especially there's been this kind of epidemic of burnout within the corporate world. So it's definitely becoming more flexible. But some employers still have the policy, if you are a certain level, you get 3 weeks. If you move to the next level, it's 4 weeks, etc. Or some employers have it based on how long you've worked at the company. So yeah, to answer your question, it depends. There's some programs that are still really quite structured and less negotiable, but I'm definitely seeing more of a shift to flexibility. So I think it's totally worth it to ask the question. And because, yeah, it really can make a big difference on your enjoyment of your role.
Great. Maya asked a really interesting question. She says that she agrees with practicing the speech, but the issue she finds is that if the conversation doesn't go how it went in her brain, she finds it hard to pivot and deal with the change in how the discussion is going. So, Jillian, do you have any tips on how to handle that situation?
Yeah, that's a really great point to bring up. And I think a good way to kind of do that is actually mock negotiations. So if you have a friend or a partner or a family member who you're comfortable with, to test out how someone would actually respond real time. That can be great. And to just kind of practice different scenarios. And then also try to think through those different scenarios in advance. So maybe you're really focused on asking for $30,000 more in compensation. And they say, we can't do that, but we can instead offer you a $30,000 stock option grant. How are you going to react to that real time? So I would say, yeah, take the time to scenario plan and try to think through them in advance, but also know you don't have to respond to anything real time in a negotiation. I say to all my clients, no matter what they offer you, say, I'm just going to take this away and think about it. If they offer you $1 million, say, thank you so much. I'm just going to take this away and think about it and figure out the details. I think sometimes we feel pressure to respond or accept in the meeting, and you never have to do that. And also you do want the time to look through the details. Maybe they're offering you, a big bonus, but it doesn't actually pay out for multiple years or something like that. So I think that's a great one to, if they throw something really weird at you that you haven't thought through, just say, thank you for this, I'll take it away and get back to you. And because sometimes time pressure can be used as a tactic. But no, yeah, you never have to accept in that moment. And if they're forcing you to do that, that's kind of a red flag for a company. I very, very rarely see that.
Well, that's great, because I think we tend to forget when we are negotiating, we sometimes accept what they give us without thinking it through.
Yeah.
So we have another question. Which resources are best for accurately gauging the compensation in your market? So Ash says that here's sites like Glassdoor aren't always providing good numbers.
Yeah, I definitely get this question a little bit. And I think that there isn't, I haven't found a perfect market data source that's out there in the market. And I think it's because compensation is so quickly changing, especially over the past couple of years. It's hard to have really good real-time public data. And I also think that every company pays their people differently. They have a unique compensation philosophy. So it's hard, if Apple is paying one thing, that doesn't mean that Netflix is going to pay the same amount for your role. So I mean, there are some good sources out there. Alpha is not a bad one. Fishbowl can have okay data, but yeah, there's no source of truth that I can really point you to. I think the best thing that I've found is talking to other people in your industry real time. And I think, especially as women, we're starting to talk about these topics more, which is great. leveraging mentors if you have to get a gut check. You can chat with advisors if you need. There's some purchasable market data out there, but I would definitely take it with a grain of salt. And I think, use what's publicly out there, but also know, based on your current compensation and the new role and where you want to be at, what do you really need to feel really good about compensation in that next role? Don't just focus on external market factors or what someone else in the team might be making.
Great. So another question we have is, how do I bring up asking for more money with my manager? So like, what is your number one tip for asking for more money, which is like sometimes difficult?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say if you're already working in a company, it's a bit of a different situation than if you're going to a new job offer or whatever it might be. And I think in that case, I always like to really start the conversation with respect. And I think I would say I would give them a heads up. I sometimes get the question, should I just go in real time and tell my manager I want more money and see how they react? I recommend instead saying, hey, we have a 101 coming up next week. I'd love to chat about my performance and compensation for a portion of it, if that works for you. So you're giving them a heads up, and that shows you're starting the conversation with respect. And in most cases, you'll get respect back. And it actually can be a good thing. Your manager can look up your compensation to see what you're making because they might have many direct reports. They can also look at budget and talk to HR about if there's any room, especially if you're in a bigger company. Budget constraints are a real thing. There's sometimes only certain times of the year that they have budget to give increases. So he or she can kind of do that beforehand. And then you're also not blindsiding them and they can prepare. And I think once you're in a company, bringing it up real time with no kind of heads up to them. Sometimes we think that can be great because it adds more pressure, but usually, they still have time to say, okay, I'll go look at this and think about it. So it's actually easier to bring it up first. And I would also say know that it's a very common part of a manager-employee relationship is asking for more money. And at the end of the day, I think we sometimes, work is so personal for us because we spend so much time there. And we really put our blood, sweat, and tears into what we do a lot of the time. But no, it is a very common thing that happens, and you are in an employment relationship, and it's not, it's not some big, huge, aggressive deal to ask for more money. It's a part of your manager's job, 100%. It's probably not their favorite part, but they've definitely been asked for more money before, and they will again. So no, you're not the only person.
So you've introduced some of the things I'm going to ask you now, but if you want to build on that, how are compensation decisions made within companies? You mentioned some of this, but if you want to add more information.
Yeah, so I would say market data is definitely a factor. If a compensation team has market data for your role, they'll likely look at that. But they'll also take into account other factors like experience. So how much experience do you have in the role? How much experience do you have in the industry? Level is definitely important. So are you a senior vice president or are you a manager? You'll likely be paid a little differently. Role scarcity is another one. So are there 3 people who can do your job in the company, or are there 20? You might be paid a little bit differently because of that. Location definitely impacts as well for most companies. We've seen some companies move to same pay rates across countries, but usually location does have some impact. And another one is importance of the function to the strategy of the company. So every company will have a unique business strategy, and within that, they'll have a unique compensation philosophy, which guides how they pay their people. And they will often pay certain types of roles at a premium because of that. So, for example, if you're working at Microsoft and you're a software engineer, you might be paid a premium for that role because it's essential to Microsoft's business strategy. However, if you're a software engineer at a bank, you might not be paid that same premium because it's not essential to the bank's business strategy, but they might pay an investment banking director a premium because that is really essential for them. So think about kind of the company's overall strategy and what's most important to them. And that can help you kind of realize where the premiums might be. And then the last piece I would say is also individual performance and unique skill set. I think these are often under focused on in negotiations because it's more awkward to talk about yourself and it's easier to talk about the market or inflation or external factors. But the market is often impacting, all people in your role. It's not specific to just you. If you can really articulate your unique skill set and the things that you've done over the past year where you've, concretely added value to a key metric within the company, that can be so persuasive. And I do see it's under focused on a lot in negotiation. So that's a really important piece.
Great. We have more questions from the audience. So Alicia asks, I was with my previous employer for 7 years. I went from sales, where I was able to negotiate my bonuses and salary, to operations, where I was told budgets are closed, that's all we can offer, during performance reviews. Any tips to combat that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I think that's tough, kind of shifting from a more negotiable role to a less negotiable one. And I think budget constraints can be real. Sometimes they can be used as an excuse, but often they are actually real. And I think if that is the case, you can say, okay, I understand that now I am feeling a little bit undercompensated for this role. So I'd love to chat about where we can get to the next time we have budget. And usually that's, if it's only annually that they do it, that's a long time period. Usually it's at least twice a year and sometimes quarterly. So if that is the reason, I would say, okay, what can we get me to in the next quarter or the next half year? So then you at least kind of have a plan for getting you to where they want you to be. And in that sense, it's not totally shut down the conversation.
Great. We have a comment. Ash says, I was told to try and time salary requests with budget planning to avoid getting locked out until the next fiscal year. It's not a question, it's a comment if you want to add on that.
Yeah, I think I sometimes get the question, like, when is the best time to ask for more money? And the best time is to do it sooner rather than later. One, if you wait way too long, you're probably at the point where you're extremely frustrated and upset about your compensation. And that's not a great way to start negotiating from. When you start thinking about it, you start thinking, okay, I'm a little bit undercompensated. I really do want to ask for more money. Bringing it up then can be such a great point because it allows your manager or whoever it might be to actually have the time to get the money for you. Often these things don't happen right away. Also, kind of related to this point, if your manager doesn't have budget right now, then they can allocate it upfront at the next time they do. And compensation cycles often work in annual processes. So it can be a longer term decision sometimes. And the earlier you do it, the better for your manager because they know they need to kind of fight to get some budget for you. So I would definitely say it's always better to do it sooner rather than later. And thinking about it just at performance review time or year end, sometimes the budget is already allocated. So if you're in, April and you're feeling undercompensated, set up a meeting with your manager now and know that it might not happen in May, but you could make sure you have a really good increase for November, or December, or whatever it may be. So always better to kind of bring it up sooner rather than later. And then you can have a positive conversation with your manager and there's less time pressure from your perspective that, if you don't get this increase in a couple of weeks, you're ready to leave.
Okay, while we wait for some more questions, if the audience has more questions, please share them. I wanted to ask you, is there something we didn't ask you about, but you wanna talk about that? Something you want to share with us?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I come across with my clients is they kind of always say the same two things to me, which has been so interesting to see over the past year of doing this. They usually say, I just felt lucky to get the offer, so I didn't want to negotiate it. Or I wanted to prove myself first before I asked for more money. And it's been so interesting to hear that from, women leaving college and negotiating their first job to C-suite senior level executives are saying the same thing. So these biases, and these things that impact us, I think we do subconsciously internalize them, and they really can impact our decision around compensation as well as confidence in the workplace. So I guess I would love to just say, know that you deserve to be in your role. You didn't just happen upon it for a reason. You worked hard and you deserve this role. And because of that, you deserve to be making the compensation that reflects your value. So I think women especially, we struggle with that. But it's kind of like this imposter syndrome, discounting our value thing. So working on that first can be really helpful. And then you'll kind of feel more confident in actually asking for more money.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great to get to know you. And thank you for being here and for sharing this wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much. Those were great questions. I really enjoyed it.